his exodus, which would soon take place in Jerusalem. And Luke very carefully uses that Greek word exodus, translated departure in English, which misses it for us, because he wants us to draw this connection between the Old Testament Exodus and what happens there. Chapter 42, when Jacob learned there was grain for sale in Egypt, he says to his sons, "Why do you look at each other?" What's going on there, do you think? Anybody got any ideas? They might be guilty. In what sense? Maybe, although this may have to do with no food. So I'm thinking there may be two options here. That may be one. I'm thinking a couple other options for that. Maybe they're starting to get jealous of each other, eyeing each other. Who's getting more here? As the food gets scarcer and scarcer. Doesn't that often happen? Or another possible interpretation here may be that they're just staring at each other, and Jacob is saying, "Will you please do something about this? Don't just sit there and look at each other. Do something. There's grain in Egypt. Go down to Egypt. Take care of us. Go." That's the one I prefer, because verse 2 seems to say that. He said, "I have heard there is grain for sale in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us there, that we may live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers. Does it bother you? I'm going to read this. Okay, I'm going to read through it. You can follow on. 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt, but Jacob did not send Benjamin. You can read Hebrew, of course, but the verse 4, the word Benjamin is first in the sentence, in verse 4. But Benjamin, the brother of Joseph, he did not send, namely Jacob didn't. Now in the Hebrew language, the verb is always first in the sentence. That's their normal order, verb. The Hebrew language is a very interesting language, at least biblical Hebrew. Movement. Most nouns are built out of verbs too. It kind of gives a real movement to the text. You don't have that in Western languages. But that's why the verb is usually first, because action, activity. May I just interrupt myself there on a language thing here. That has always fascinated me studying Hebrew. I think that's why I like it, because we see in the Old Testament a God of action and activity, unlike Islam. Or according to the Quran, I don't think Allah does too much. He just sits up there in paradise somewhere collecting virgins for those who are suicide bombers, I guess. I don't know what he's doing up there. But he doesn't really act in history for his people. The Old Testament is a record of God acting for his people, doing things. And the Hebrew language itself was a great vehicle for showing that, because it's such a language of movement and activity. Now when you put a noun first in the sentence, as is in verse 4, it's highly emphatic. And this suggests here that Jacob, and there are going to be other little clues in the text, is suspicious of his other sons. He's suspicious that this business of Joseph getting torn up by an animal and so on, and they came back with this bizarre story, he's never really believed that, okay? Because he'll give some suggestions of that later on. But he may be concerned here that Benjamin, why is he concerned about Benjamin? Tell me about Benjamin. Yes, it's the youngest son, the other son, besides Joseph, of his favorite wife. The one he had wanted to marry initially from his uncle Laban. Remember that? And he worked 7 years for her. His love was so great that it seemed like my own marriage. It went by 35 years like I married yesterday. All of us are after marriage. So anyway, Joseph works for 7 years. What did I say? Jacob works for 7 years for his wife. And the text does say that, though. It seemed like a day for his love for his wife. And what happens the night he's going to marry her? He gets the wrong one, the weak-eyed one, whatever that means, Leah. And now how this worked, I'm not going to go into detail there, but anyway, spends the night with Leah, thinking it's Rachel, wakes up in the morning, finds out it's Leah. He is upset. Well said. And Laban says, you know, it's not our custom to give away the youngest first. Sorry about that. Why didn't you tell me before? Well, okay. I'll work 7 more years. So he ended up working 14 years for Rachel. And she is his favorite wife, and also she is barren. As the Old Testament puts it, she doesn't get pregnant for several years. And finally, she has a child. Joseph, which means maybe he had another. And God does. Gives him Benjamin which means son of my right hand. I'm thinking, do I have this right? I'm trying to think back. Did Rachel die? Yes, she dies at the birth of Benjamin. She cries out as she's in childbirth, giving birth to her son. She calls him Ben-Oni, which means son of my affliction. That she does not live to see her youngest boy, her born. And Jacob changes the name to Benjamin, son of my right hand. Right hand means, my wife's lefty, sorry about this, but the right hand means the place of power. Okay, best place of authority, the place of honor. Right hand always signified that. Left hand was a sinister place. Isn't that what left hand sinister means? Left-handed? Something like that? Anybody speak Latin? Yeah, I know it does. Sinister, so if you're sinister, you're left-handed. Okay? You don't trust people who are left-handed. That's what you're right now.
I thought it was.
What?
I thought it was smart.
Are you a left-handed one?
I do, yes.
See, that's what we're talking about, sinister. They always write some other meaning. It would work. But anyway, so Benjamin becomes very, very special to Jacob. I give you that whole story because I think that's very critical, the background here, and why Jacob hesitates to send Benjamin off. He does not want to lose the last, what's the word I want here? The last remnant, that's not the right word, of his dear wife, Rachel. Okay? He's lost Joseph, will he lose Benjamin? So, verse 4:3, 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. Jacob, not send Benjamin, Joseph's brothers. He feared harm might happen to him. The Hebrew word for harm actually can mean mischief too, which may be interesting. Maybe that's a little clue too. Mischief, not just harm, mischief. That maybe his brothers, would they sell Benjamin as they may have done to Joseph? Now he doesn't know the details, or does he? I don't know. That Joseph had been sold. We know the story. We know the story. That may be why the writer uses the word to translate mischief here, because we, the reader, have insights here that this is what happened to Joseph, wasn't it? They sold it. And maybe Benjamin will be sold too. For grain? Who knows? The sons of Israel, ooh, it changes now. See, there you go. It changes from Jacob to Israel. Let God fight for you. So here, poor Jacob, as he sends his sons down for grain, I think we've got a hidden story starting to surface here. That God is going to be fighting for his people here, you see. He's going to bring them down to Egypt. He will not forget them. He will fight for them. It will take 400 years, but he will bring them out again, back to the promised land. You get all that floating under the text here, okay? And just a little side note on that too. We see only a little piece of the puzzle in the history of the world, don't we? And yet, if we can look in hindsight, we see a long term in history, a long time in history. We can see God at work, can't we? The example I've often used is the Reformation itself, where at the time I don't think people knew what God was doing by permitting the Muslims, the Turks at that time, to invade Europe, burn, rape, pillage all over Europe. And Charles V, emperor of the whole Roman Empire, is terrified about this, and so he cannot risk sending his troops into Germany to crush this revolt against the Holy Roman Church called the Reformation. And so the Reformation survives. And we look back on that in the 21st century and say, now we see what was going on there. Sometimes it takes several hundred years, right? So let's not get depressed today. If we might live to see our own United States collapsing into ruin, well, I don't mean to push that too much, becoming even more of a mess. We don't know what God is doing. If the world stands for another several hundred centuries, people may look back and say, we see now why this happened, okay? We don't know. We live by faith day by day. And like Joseph, we do our best where God puts us, but leave it ultimately up to God. That's the way we live as Christians. Verse 6. Now Joseph was governor over the entire land, and he was the one who sold to all the people of the land. Again, we read between the lines, we think of his expertise, what he needed to know. Did he have a course in economics? Did he have a PhD degree from the University of Egypt on how to do all this stuff? Again, I think this shows the tremendous wisdom this man had. By the way, wisdom in the Old Testament, sometime